Good morning, church. Welcome to the best time of the week. God is here. Not just because we're in this sanctuary. God is here. We are the sanctuary of God. We are the dwelling place of the life, the breath, the Spirit of God. God is here. It is so amazingly good to be with you guys here. So good. So good that I got to get a little closer. We left 6 years and 2 weeks ago today. So that means there's a lot of people in this room that you have no idea who I am or who we are. But our family shares a lot of memories with a lot of you in this room that happened in this very room. So we came in the fall of 2000. And our first Glory in Christmas was, of course, the Christmas season of 2000. And that young man, our son, who you just heard that beautiful song, this is him at our first Glory of Christmas. So he was totally enthralled with my conducting of the orchestra. And he would stand behind me during rehearsal and wave his little baton. And so for that first Glory of Christmas, we dressed him in that tux, and he stood right there behind me for the opening song of each presentation and conducted with me. It was awesome. And then that next spring was the first presentation of the Passion Play, and this is our daughter Kelsey singing the Lamb song that very first year. And then came the fall of 2001. And we all went through 9/11 together. And I remember that Sunday after that Tuesday, the orchestra played Be Still My Soul, and the choir sang Lord Have Mercy. And we had a communion table that was even bigger than this. It was probably 9 feet wide, or 9 feet long, 3 feet wide. And a pastor had invited anyone who knew someone or a family that was impacted to take a prayer card and write their name, and at the end of the service, come up and put it on the table. And by the end of the second service, the table was overflowing and several inches high of cards. So whether you know me or not, we all went through that together. It's just a stunning time in the history of our country and our world. Jumping forward a bunch of years, this was the first time Taylor played drums for the Glory of Christmas. This is a shot of one of our Friday night Audience of One concerts, right? Yep. And then June 29th, 2013, this is our daughter coming down the aisle with her husband. And largely, one of the reasons we're here, which has just worked out so great, is Jackie's wedding. Jackie Bichelle and Travis, their wedding was yesterday, and Kelsey was coordinating their wedding. It was just an awesome, beautiful day. But the most stunning memory that I have in this room, I was the only human being in this room, and the room looked like this. It was Mother's Day, 2013, at 7:30 in the morning. And I was getting ready for what was going to be the first of, at that time, 3 services. And I was walking up this staircase right over here to get to the balcony to turn on all the tech stuff. And I got to this landing, and God stopped me dead in my tracks by interrupting my thoughts with his voice. And I heard him so clearly, it may as well have been audible, say these words: "You've done what you can do here." And I was just in shock. And I feel the emotion of it right now. I'm pushing the emotion of it down right now so I can keep talking to you. And all that morning I'm like, God, would you mind saying something else? Could you give a little commentary to that brief statement? And 72 hours later, on Wednesday morning, I was on my knees before the Lord over at 5 Teal Lane, where we lived, begging God to say something else. Knelt and listened, and graciously and divinely heard him say, "I've given you a message for my church concerning worship. And I'm positioning you so that message will have a greater influence." And at the time, I assumed that the positioning meant he was going to put me somewhere so that I could do what he wanted me to do. And that was true. But what I wasn't prepared for is that he was positioning me so I could become who he's called me to be. And these last 6 years have been a journey of that for me, and then a journey of the unfolding to speak to the church what he's called me to say to the church. And just thank you again so much, Pastor, for the gracious invitation to be here and deliver this message to you. So I am here to encourage you in your relationship with God and to challenge you in your role in growing God's kingdom. Our mission statement is growing God's kingdom through connecting worship to life. Because worship translates into missions, and missions is worship. And our vision statement is to bring the worship is life message to the body of Christ on every continent. And these last few years, God has just opened just so many doors. I've been on 4 different continents. And it's just been stunning to see the Lord fulfill his word that he gave to me. And I know we're just getting started as we follow him, just as you are on the journey you are on right now. And so grateful to be here and to be able to give you this message. So we're gonna answer 2 questions this morning. The first question is this: what is the connection between a worship service like we are having right now and a life of worship? I spent most of my ministry years planning, preparing, and presenting individual worship experiences, largely unaware of this special connection that God wants us so much to be aware of. And then once I realized that, I realized how much of my life I was living disengaged from God. Have you ever realized that? Got to the end of a day or got to the end of a week or got to the end of a month and just realized, wow, God, I've been disengaged from you. Or maybe you're sitting there right now and you've never, ever in your life engaged with God. I mean, I wasn't running from God. I wasn't intentionally ignoring God. I was just so often just living my life disengaged from God. And the second question we're going to answer is, why does it matter? Why does that matter? So I'm going to share with you 3 different insights. The first insight is this: worship equals relationship. Let's all say that together. Worship equals relationship. Say it again. Worship equals relationship. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I want every one of you to think of a one-word answer. And then I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and you're all going to say the answer out loud together. Ready? Here is the question. When you hear a leader say, "Let's all stand and worship," what activity do you assume we are going to engage in? 1, 2, 3. Sing. Whoa! Thank you for making that work. I appreciate it greatly. Guess what? I hear the same answer to that question all around the world. Now, we all know that worship is not just singing. Matter of fact, you know one of Pastor's famous Zarlingoisms, worship is more than the song that we sing, it's the life that we live. What does that exactly mean? What does it mean that it's not the song, it's more than that, it's the life that we live? Now, there is something beautifully true that I'm going to show you about calling our singing time the worship time. But there's also a very significant unintended consequence that we are going to expose with that language and allow these insights to encourage us and challenge us. So, you might find this interesting. In the scriptures, the word worship is found nearly 200 times, but only a handful of times is the word worship in the Bible found in the context of music and singing. So God's description of worship is much deeper and much broader than our current cultural idea of worship. And when I've studied all these passages in the scriptures where we find the word worship, there's one word for me that rises to the top to describe all these passages, and that word is relationship. God always looks through the lens of relationship. Everything God does is in the context of relationship. Now, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of this in the scripture, and we are going to look at just one, and I would submit that this is the foundational example. The 10 Commandments. Now, when I ask people, what do you think of when you think of the 10 Commandments? And most people say something like, I think of a list of rules, or I think of a list of do's and don'ts. I think of what's wrong and what's right. But if we do what God does, and that is look through the lens of relationship, then we begin to see that the 4 commands on the left are all about how to do relationship with God. And the 6 commands on the right are all about how to do relationship with others. Because God always looks through the lens of relationship. Everything God does is in the context of relationship. When God came to us in the flesh, in the person of Yeshua, who we call Jesus. By that time, the Jewish leaders had added hundreds, if not thousands, of commands to the commands. So eventually, a Jewish leader came to Jesus and said, "Teacher, tell us, what is the greatest command?" Because it was very popular to sit around amongst the Jewish leaders and argue about look at all these commands. What is the greatest command? So they came to Jesus, asked him, what is the greatest command? And we all know that Jesus started by saying, love God with your entire being. And then he made the first of two stunning statements. He said, and the second is like the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. The second command is the same as the first. They work as one. You cannot love God without loving people, and you cannot love people unconditionally for the long haul without the help of God. At least I can't. I don't know what your experience has been. But man, if it wasn't for people, I'd get along with everybody. But as soon as I get amongst the people, it like pushes up against my relationship with God. They function as one. And then he makes the second stunning statement, and he says, all the law and the prophets, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commands, because God always looks through the lens of relationship. Everything God does is in the context of relationship. And I would submit to you that God calls this worship. Worship equals relationship. The second insight is this: God does relationship in a pattern. Now, an aspect about God that we don't talk about much is that God always works in patterns. I mean, every person on the planet sees it. We all see it. We recognize it without even really thinking about it. This reality that God always works in patterns. I'm going to ask you to help me prove that. So we're going to do 6 patterns. We're going to go section by section. So first it'll be the balcony up there, then this section, then this section, then this section, then this section, and then the balcony up there. I'm going to say most of the pattern, and you are all going to answer with one word to complete the pattern. Are you ready, balcony? On that side. Here we go. First comes day, and then comes... You guys ready? The ocean tide comes in, and the ocean tide goes... You guys ready? You reap what you... You guys ready? Forgive, and you will be... You guys ready? Judge, and you will be... Balcony, ready up there? Show mercy, and you will be shown... Right? Like it's obvious. Everybody sees it. Whether it's a law of creation or a law of living, God has established, and he works in patterns. So, it shouldn't be surprising to us that God does relationship with us in a pattern. And we're going to call this pattern revelation and response. Everyone say that together? Revelation and response. God reveals himself to us and invites us to respond to him, and then God responds to us. And this is how God does relationship with us. He shows us who he is. He shows us what he's done. He shows us what he wants us to do. Then he invites us to respond. And then as we respond, he responds. And this is how God does relationship. And this is what God would call worship. Now, once you begin to think about this pattern and you start reading your Bible, you're going to start seeing it everywhere. I can barely ever find a page in the Bible where I'm not seeing his relational pattern of revelation and response. But the easiest way to recognize it is when we think of the stories of the lives in the Bible. So first of all, let's look at Noah. Obviously, God spoke to Noah. Noah responded by obeying everything that God showed him to do. And then we see God's response. And then let's look at Abraham. Huge example of a life lived in revelation. God speaks to Abraham and says, go. And Abraham responds in obedience. And then God responds to him. And we see a whole life of Abraham responding. We see some positive response from Abraham. And then we see some negative response from Abraham. Can anyone relate? And either way, God responds to Abraham. This is his pattern. What about Moses? Kind of an obvious one there, the old burning bush. God reveals himself through the burning bush, and the rest of Moses' life, God is revealing himself to him. Moses responds in obedience 99.9% of the time, and then God responds to him 100% of the time. Okay? So this is this relational pattern. How about the mother of Jesus, Mary? Wow. The angel Gabriel speaking to her, and this is her response. I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. Don't you want to live there? Man, that's where I want to live. And God invites us to live there every moment of every day. Listening to him, looking to him, responding to him. And of course, God in the flesh, in the person of Jesus, teaches this, models this, shows us that it's possible. And in John 5:19, he says this, the Son can only do what he sees the Father doing. That's where we want to grow to. We want to continue every day to grow to that point. The son, the daughter can only do what they see the Father doing. This is God's relational pattern, this pattern of revelation and response. Now, you may be saying, all right, that sounds impossible. Staying engaged with God every moment of every day, it does sound impossible. And it is hard. It is hard. I'm going to show you my favorite earthly analogy of revelation and response that has helped me understand that, yes, it is hard, but I can grow in staying engaged with God. And my favorite earthly analogy has become the analogy of driving. So I'm going to share with you what most of you don't know about me, and that is 2 days a week, I teach teenagers how to drive. And yes, I've had 30 or 40 near-death experiences. But it's been an amazing job because I get these teenagers one-on-one for 2 hours at a time. And the conversations, I've had Hindu students, Buddhist students, Muslim students, transgender students, gender fluid students. Do you know what that means? Gender fluid students. I've had lots of Christian kids that I've been able to encourage and speak into their life and share with them this relational pattern of revelation. Because I learned this when I was teaching one of my kids about 3 years ago. I was just reading off the sheet what I was supposed to read to them. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Driving is revelation and response. Because when you're driving, every second you are responding to what's being revealed to you moment by moment. You see a green light and you go. You see a red light and you stop. You see a yellow light and you either slow down or speed up, depending on the situation. Now watch this. When you're maximizing your potential as a legal and safe driver, as we all should be trying to do, you are focused on two relational dynamics. You're focused on your relationship with the authority by obeying the laws of driving, and you're focused on everybody else around you. And these are the two relational dynamics that God calls us to focus on all the time. Our relationship with our authority and the laws for living, and our relationships with everybody else around us. Now, you fail to maximize your potential as a legal and safe driver when you become what? Distracted. When you become distracted. And this is exactly what happens to us in life, because when you become distracted, the focus shifts to who? The focus shifts to self. And this is exactly what happens in life. The focus shifts to self because we come out of the womb focusing on ourselves. Who turned the temperature down? Screaming for that first breath, screaming for that first nourishment. But God calls us not to focus on ourselves, but to focus on relationship with Him, which, as Pastor shared earlier, as you were greeting, always translates into relationship with others. And God describes this in His Word as worship. The third insight is going to describe, why does this matter? Because unless what happens when we gather translates into what happens when we scatter, then what happens when we gather doesn't matter. Unless what happens when we gather translates into what happens when we scatter, then what happens when we gather doesn't matter. Here's the third insight. I think a pretty stunning statement. We worship God best when we love others. Can we all say it together? We worship God best when we love others. Pastor, how long have you been thinking, when am I going to dismiss those who are serving communion? Yeah, that's when I should have said it about 10 minutes ago. So, those of you who are serving communion, you're going to have to drive quickly. Not in the slow lane, in the HOV lane. Thank you. We worship God best when we love others. So you already greeted my wife this morning. This is a picture of us this last fall at an apple orchard, actually where Kelsey and Ben got engaged. And I have a wonderful, wonderful wife. Matter of fact, yesterday was our 34th wedding anniversary. And many of you know my wife, and you know how wonderful she is. But no matter how wonderful she is, I am too selfish and too self-centered to love my wonderful wife unconditionally and for the long haul, unless I'm staying engaged with God. Unless I stay in touch with God, unless I stay connected to God, my self-centeredness and my selfishness rises up and has the potential to treat my wonderful wife in ways that I should not treat her, or speak to my wonderful wife in ways that I should not speak to her. I have amazing kids. I mean, I'm talking amazing kids. Those of you who know our kids, you know how amazing they are. And you're experiencing a little bit of that this morning. But no matter how amazing my kids are, I am too selfish and too self-centered to love my kids unconditionally and for the long term unless I'm staying engaged with God. Now, we live in a world where we are surrounded by others, strangers, acquaintances, friends, co-workers, classmates, family, and the list goes on and on and on. God has put us on this planet surrounded with people to be in relationship with them. But I am too selfish and too self-centered to focus on others unless I am staying engaged with God and welcoming Him and acknowledging Him into every situation. I have a picture of a server and a couple there because this is one of the many ways that our family engages in worship as life. And we learned this from Pastor Gary. So whenever we're at a restaurant that we know we're going to have a server, we actually treat that server like a person instead of like a slave. And we're interacting with them, getting their name, just being loving to them. And then once they've finished taking our order, we just say, we're going to say a blessing over our meal. Is there anything in your life that could use a blessing? I mean, we've done this dozens, maybe hundreds of times. And the response is just amazing. I mean, we have had servers break into tears in that moment. We've had a server say, this is the most positive experience I've ever had in my life with a Christian. We had a server say a couple months ago, I've been working here for 20 years, and this is the first time anyone's ever asked me that question. And I think, wonder how many Christians she served over those 20 years. And it's just like, there's all these ways that we can invite God, who is in us, into the situation, into the life of the person. And just think of just doing that with a server. I mean, every time that is done, that server, on some level, is going to be contemplating God. This is how God grows His kingdom, which is why it matters. God grows His kingdom by working through His sons and daughters who are staying engaged with Him. And when we live that way, it grows His kingdom. Let me just give you one stunning example. We were here 2 weeks ago for Tommy Piero's memorial service. And this room was much, much fuller than it is right now. It was standing room only on this level and dozens on each side of the balcony. How many people in this room do you think could pack this place out for their funeral? I know I couldn't. And the testimony that kept coming up over and over again, why this room was packed for a 46-year-old man that sadly passed, a dear, dear friend of mine. And it's because he lived his life like we're talking about. He lived his life stopping his work and talking and sharing with people. He lived his life by going to thousands of sporting events to support young people. Dozens of concerts and plays just because he loved young people and loved people. And this place was packed because that's how God grows his kingdom. Matter of fact, I can testify in that room that night, I myself had a relationship that had been broken for about a dozen years, had a divine moment right back there, and had a relationship restored at Tommy's service. Worship equals relationship. God always looks through the lens of relationship, and he's calling us to grow in staying engaged with him, looking to him, listening to him, and responding to him. The last thing I'll share is there's a phrase and an acrostic that the Lord has given me to help me and to help others, and we've put it on a magnet, which we don't have many left of these after the first service, so we may have to mail some to the office. But the phrase is living in awe of God. So staying in this place, and awe being a very worshipful word, and so A, acknowledge, W, welcome, and E, engage. So we are invited by our Creator, we are invited by our Redeemer, we are invited by our Helper to engage by continually acknowledging him and welcoming him into every moment, into every encounter, into every task, into every conversation. That's right, guys. You got to multitask. You got to invite God into every encounter. It's a journey. It's a journey. But God helps us grow when we respond and say, God, I want to be a part of growing your kingdom as I recognize you as Creator and Redeemer and Helper. Help me to love those around me. We have a resource table back there. Taylor's CD is back there, but also my book, Worship is Life. The subtitle is Finding Our Identity in the Story of Worship, and that's available in Spanish as well. And then my good friend and your own Bruce Rose penned this book, My First Worship. We actually partnered with Bruce to publish this, and I know he's sold it here before, but he's out there, and this is available. We call this Worship is Life for Kids. And I've taken this book all around the world, and it's just a powerful, powerful formation tool to help our children understand how they can engage with God and others all throughout their day. I love it that it's Communion Sunday, because communion is the perfect initial response to this message, because that's what the table is about. The table is about restored relationship with God and restored relationship with others. As we take these elements, like God created this bread. God created this juice. He's mysteriously present everywhere and in us as his children for the purpose of helping us love everybody else around us. That's why. That's why. So Taylor's going to sing a 90-second response to the first song that he sang. And as he sings, I just want you to say, Lord, what does it look like for me where I am with you and others right now? What does it look like for me to grow in staying engaged with you?
You're here. You're with me. I'm letting go.
God, we bow our lives before you with these elements that represent your broken body, your shed blood, but they also represent everything about you, all that you have said, all that you have shown us, so that we can love those around us. And so as we partake of these elements, Lord God, we remember and we give thanks. Let's partake together. Just give him thanks. Give him thanks for who he is. Give him thanks for what he's done. Give him thanks for the help that he gives us to be who he's called us to be, to love like he's called us to love, to worship him like he's called us to worship him. One last insight. The beautiful secret behind why our singing time has become labeled as our worship time. You know, in the scriptures it says over 120 times to sing praises. Because God knows that singing songs to him, about him and for him, is one of the most effective and meaningful ways to enter into his relational pattern of revelation and response. Like if we were to throw the lyrics up of the songs that we sang this morning, every lyric would be either a lyric of revelation or a lyric of response. So engaging with the songs themselves brings us into the pattern of responding to who he is, and guess what happens? He responds because we're responding to him. So it's a beautiful, 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 beautiful time. But it is only one way that we engage with him. Only one way that we engage with him. Lord, help us. Help us as we look to you, as we listen to you, as we respond to you.